one of the challenges that we have, or anybody that wants to start their own initiative, whether it's for money or just for fun, is us getting out of our own way.
On today's episode, we are featuring Liz Hartman, who is the founder of Swiatlo, a slow fashion brand crafted from Indian artisan textiles and repurposed materials. Liz earned her BFA in fashion at Parsons in New York and worked as a pattern maker, sample sewer, and technical designer at a variety of established brands, including Kenneth and Ralph Lauren's Club Monaco. Liz traveled to Ahmedabad in 2016 seeking deeper meaning in clothes making and fell in love with the acts of devotion and respect for ecology intrinsic to the making of Indian craft textiles. After starting Swiatlo, Liz settled in India to work closely with the amazing tailors, printers, and NGOs who breathe life into her work. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the exciting journey of Liz Hartman.
Hi Liz, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's great to finally connect with you and have you on the show.
It's wonderful to be here.
Awesome. Great. So now you are a fashion designer and you have a pretty unique approach to how you go about it. So I'm curious to know, how did you decide to take up fashion as a career?
Well, I've always loved the power of dress and how it affects our mood, how every day when we wake up, we can choose who we want to be and how we want to express ourselves to the world via the way we choose to dress ourselves. And I've always loved that since I was a kid, dressing up, at home. And then when I entered high school, I began sewing for myself and my friends. I would find old shirts at the Goodwill or some other thrift store and cut them up and make them into dresses. And this is just something I've always loved to do, the creative self expression via clothing creation. And then I went to fashion school. I went to Parsons in New York. And after graduating from there, I worked at Ralph Lauren and Kenneth and some other brands before beginning my own business.
Right. Yeah, that's exciting. And I really like the way you put it into that perspective that you could choose to be anything you want, and you are sort of projecting an image to the world that, okay, this is how I'm feeling and my clothes are a reflection of that. And
Mm.
it's very fascinating to me because I have a lot of friends at Parson and I do help them with their fashion project from time to time, and so it's an exciting universe. So uh, how do you relate past and present fashion trends? What are some of the current fashion trends that you're excited about?
So, something that I love about fashion trends is that they are a lot deeper than they appear in face value. um, what I guess you would say is trendy in the fashion world always reflects what's happening in society. Culturally, politically, it all kind of comes out through the clothing. And right now, we're seeing a lot of very bright colors and bold statements trending as people are starting to step outside again. They're starting to meet friends again over here in the US. Whereas, before the pandemic, there was a lot of this minimalist kind of neutral, thing going on. And I think that's still there, but people are, from what I've been seeing and what I'm actually experiencing personally myself, is wanting to make bold statements and really like express myself in a very loud way, after we were all kind of sitting at home. So I'm very excited about that because I love bright colors. It's a big theme in my work.
Right. Yeah. So, do you think like seasons or seasons as in like actual seasons, like monsoon, summer, winter, all of that? Do you think that sort of also plays a role in how the fashion evolves within a year also? Because I think there are certain activities related to summer or let's say winter, and that sort of becomes the form of expression. So, do you think that within same year also there's sort of this cycle that happens where people go through different kinds of color choices and material choices in how they express?
Oh, absolutely, of course. There's always a mood, every season when you have the summer. I mean, obviously, bright colors are always associated with summer. We're all really excited to get outside after the winter, pandemic or no pandemic. Everybody wants to, enjoy the great outdoors, and the weather is getting absolutely beautiful here. So of course people will be interested to wear some fun clothing, and then as that winds down, we go into the fall. You have, your jewel tones and your deep, rich hues, getting ready for that holiday season. But something that I find very interesting when it comes to seasonality in fashion is that a lot of designers, including myself, are not designing as much for seasons as we are for longevity. So we are looking for cuts and fits and colors that will kind of last you year round. And especially considering the climate crisis and how, you've got like all these dips and spikes in the temperature at any given time during the year. You want a few garments that, you can layer on or you can take off, and they're going to work for you. Like, I think that we're a little bit beyond the traditional, like, okay, right now I have sweaters, and then another time of the year I have t-shirts, where now everything's kind of mixed together. So designers are thrown that challenge of, it could be any season at any given time of the year these days. So how do we accommodate for that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like, with the whole climate crisis that we are facing right now. In the middle of summer, we had like 3 days of rain here in New York City, and it was very cold. So of course, the hoodie and like the jacket that I had put away, I had to bring it out just to like hang out with my friends. So yeah, I think it's a ever evolving, very fast paced kind of thing. So now, as a fashion designer, what is the best and the worst part of being a fashion designer?
Well, I think the best part in general, as a fashion entrepreneur, and I make my own schedule. I get to express myself creatively. I love having this opportunity to work with the NGOs that I work with in India, the different artisans and the different other people who work in this space who are entrepreneurial, and we share ideas and we come up with projects together. And that is the most rewarding part, I think, is building something that has social impact as well as is a creative expression for everybody involved. The difficult part is, of course, running a business. I mean, at fashion school, they didn't teach us as much about running a business and filing taxes and all that boring stuff. As I wish I would have been encouraged to spend a little less time sketching and a little more time like learning about business tax, as non glamorous as that is. But yeah, learning how to run a business has been new for me, and I've been lucky to have, we are lucky these days to have YouTube and all these other things online where we can find those resources. But yeah, there's definitely a learning curve for the nitty gritty of running your own business.
Yeah. Yeah, and I went to business school, and I still struggle with taxes. So that just goes on to show that, taxes are difficult for everybody, not just, non-business students. And yes, I think, there are some life skills that are not taught or are not part of the general education system. In general, for example, like, filing taxes or understanding, basic investment stuff. And so people struggle with this, and they make, common mistakes, and I've made so many of them despite being a business student. So I can understand that, and I'm an entrepreneur as well. So I just wish I had, like, I could spend less time doing paperwork and more time doing creative stuff, but that's just a
No, I
reality of
agree.
running a business.
And I think like another thing that is really big for entrepreneurs, or like, I don't know if this fits in with the question, but one of the challenges that we have, or anybody that wants to start their own initiative, whether it's for money or just for fun, is us getting out of our own way. Because I noticed that I'm the number one person thinking, oh gosh, is that going to work? Or can I even do this? Or like, I set up my own blocks. And I think that's a common problem for all of us. Like, we have a lot of goals, but we can also be the first person to say, no, 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 don't put yourself through that. You can't do it. When really, we can do anything. We are, as
Yeah.
they say, powerful beyond our own belief. And that's, I think, yeah, the number one struggle that myself and many of my entrepreneurial friends have is just getting out of our own way and empowering our own selves to get out there and, accomplish those things that we have in our minds.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really important point, more so in the context of being an entrepreneur. So now, exploring this idea into a little bit more detail, you alluded to some of the challenges of being an entrepreneur, especially being a fashion entrepreneur. Uh, Now, if you also consider on top of that that you are a female fashion entrepreneur, right? Does that make your journey a bit more complicated, a bit more tricky. uh, and the other question is like, adding on to that is like, you have a pretty unique name for your company. I think it's called Swiatlo, right? So
Yes,
what's the origin of
Swiatlo.
Swiatlo? Yeah. So what's the origin of that name? So you can address these two questions at the same time.
Sure, yeah. So Swiatlo is a Polish word. It's actually pronounced Światło, but I mean, we just say Swiatlo because our major markets are India and the US. And for the most part, that's kind of a tough word. I had to play it on Google over and over again to get myself to say it correctly. So my mother has Polish heritage, and we have family in Poland. And growing up in Pittsburgh, which has a lot of Polish immigrants, that identity was a huge part of my childhood. All of our cultural things that we did and traditional things that we did, especially around the holidays. So there's a big part of my heart that is relating to that country, to the old country as we call it. And I when I began my business, I didn't want to give it my name. Um, there were a few people, through fashion school saying, don't name your first business after yourself. Many designers have done that. They've gone on to be super successful. So I guess I don't have anything against it. Just for myself, I was like, I want to keep this business the business and me, and we'll try and have some sort of separation between that for now. And so I wanted to give it a name. And my mother, who does digital marketing, and she helps me out on the back end, she's involved in that way with the business. She came up with the name actually. She was like, let's give it a Polish word. So much of the culture influences, our creativity and our design. So we wanted to give a nod to that because I had actually thought to give it an Indian name since I live in India and Indian fabrics influence my design, Indian culture influences my sensibilities. But we talk about that a lot in the narrative, and it's very obvious when you see the clothing where the clothing is made. So we thought, okay, India is there. You cannot mistake that. So we added the Polish aspect to it as well with Światło, which I actually forgot to define. Światło means light to illuminate. So it's kind of referencing that feeling of following your inner light and doing what you feel is the right thing to do as we move through our lives.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great origin story in terms of how the name came to be. And I totally feel you because the actual pronunciation of my company is Ancia Productions. It's an Italian word for the 12th part of something. Okay, so mathematically 1 divided by 12 of something. Now it seems weird that okay, a media company is named after a mathematical expression, but
I love it
I'm a
actually.
nerd.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a nerd and I hung out around a lot of Italians in the early stages of my filmmaking and media career. So I'm like, okay, let's just take a word out of that culture and, bring it together with my company. So that's how. But of course, Ancha is hard for people to pronounce. So we just made it Ansia. So it's that. But yeah, being a female entrepreneur, like is there like another layer of complexity or challenge that is added to your journey, or you didn't feel like that was a problem?
I actually love it. Like, I think that just for my work specifically, because I do work with women's groups, I do go to villages. I want to work with other women, and supporting them and becoming financially independent. And I can't help but feel like if I was a man, that would be actually more difficult. And especially in India, you can't have just random men hanging around in the women's group. So being a female, I've been able to move through those spaces relatively easily. I am learning Hindi and trying to become even more fluid within these areas. But I mean, I guess I'm not sure if being female has hindered me in any way because I'm in fashion. Like if I was in stock trading or the nuts and bolts business or something, like probably then that would become a problem. But because we're in fashion, we're working with women. Like it's been good.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I think in general, sort of there's this roadblocks that are put, like, that exist for women because most businesses are designed keeping men in mind, which is deeply problematic. And but it's just like, it will take time to change, and of course it needs to change. But yeah, I think that's great that being part of fashion, dealing with women, and being part of that community, you didn't face any challenges. So yeah, any women out there looking to become fashion designers, don't worry, you'll be fine. uh, uh,
I guess it depends
uh,
where in the world you want to work. So
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's that all. There's that also. Yes. Um, okay. So I guess being a man in India as a fashion designer could be a problem then, because generally it's seen sort of as like, females. I mean, there are male designers, but
I wonder what it would be like because I have some male friends over there who are designers, and their advantage is that they are Indian and they speak Hindi, and they understand so many cultural sensibilities that I'm still learning. Like, when I go to village areas, there's certain ways that you should dress, that you should act to be respectful. And those are all things I'm learning. Whereas anyone native to India, of course, would generally know these things. But, no one can know everything, right? But they generally have like the understanding of how those places work.
right, yeah, yeah. I think it's great that you're sharing all these insights because yeah, I think there are challenges in general, and then there are benefits that come with being a male or female. You just have to, I guess, like chart your own path through this challenges. Right. So your company was born in New York City, but then you moved it to New Delhi. I'm curious to know what prompted that transition.
Sure. So I had been living in New York for 10 years. After going to school there and then working there in corporate fashion, and I had visited India for the first time in 2016 just to work with an NGO with some fashion work and learn about craft. I'd always been fascinated by Indian culture and the fabrics, the textiles. I thought, I wanted to learn more about it and see if I could contribute in some way. So I went there and I loved it a lot. I was supposed to be there for a month. I stayed for 6 months. I thought, wow, this culture is incredible. This place is beautiful. I mean, of course, nowhere is perfect, right? But when you first go somewhere, you have the rose colored glasses, and I loved it so much. And then I kept going back. I kept experiencing different parts of the country, different crafts, different people, different foods. It's incredible how every state in India is like a different country. They all have their own thing going on, and it's just so
Yeah,
beautiful. And so the last time I visited as a trip in 2018, 2019, I met my now husband Ashwat, and we decided pretty quickly to get married, and we had to choose where to live. Right, we had to pick one, and I was loving India. He has his own established career there, and I loved being there. My production is there. I very much it's so very close to my heart to work directly with the people who are making the fabric, making the clothes. I mean, doing stuff from over here in the US is great and it's doable, but being there and learning about their lives and speaking the language with them, like that's like my most passionate. I just love it. And so we thought let's choose India. Let's live in India. And so I shifted to Delhi and we do still make regular trips to the US such as, this month. But yeah, we moved there, and soon enough we'll be registered there. We'll have GST, and we'll be truly by country brand, and I'm really looking forward to that.
that's great, and I'm so glad that my culture, because I'm also Indian, my culture was able to give you all this, like different things to get inspired by, and make you as part of our culture and inspire your creativity in some sense, and that then turning into a decision for you to not only combine your sensibilities of learning fashion in New York and then mixing it or combining it with the Indian designs, and turning that into an actual business. So that's pretty great. And I love that about people where they go into a different culture, or like they embrace elements of a different culture and then inculcate that as part of their business or their identity in whatever sense. And not only for India, for like all the any other culture. Like I personally love Japanese culture. I have lots of friends over there.
Oh,
My first
same.
film was actually in Japanese. I don't speak Japanese, but I wanted to make a film in Japanese. So no matter how challenging it was, I did it. And yeah, there's a
That's
Spanish
so
version
cool.
of this podcast. So, and I don't speak Spanish either, but I knew that I had to
Yeah,
share stories of people from that region. So it's that. So yeah, I love being like part of different cultures and experiencing their journeys and bringing it in some form through from some form of storytelling. So that's great. uh, do you go to Sarojini Market and look at the designs that they have over there in New Delhi?
I love Sarojini Market. Actually, I'm pretty sure the shirt that I'm wearing is from Sarojini Market. This is one of my captains for Swiatlo, and then I have Sarojini. So Sarojini is it's how do I explain? Like, so there's a lot of fast fashion there, which is very crappy and should be avoided. And then there's a lot of things that
Yeah.
are vintage, which are from the factories surrounding Delhi. A lot of these things are reference samples that designers send to factories to use as a reference for new design development. When I worked at Ralph Lauren, we actually used to do that. We would find designer things or vintage things at thrift shops in New York, and we would send it to the factory in Gurgaon, actually, who would then take the measurements. Sometimes they'd send it back, sometimes they didn't. What often happens is they throw it in a bag with a bunch of other samples that they've made at that factory, and they sell them in bulk. And those things often end up at Sarojini. So it's important to know the difference between like what is a crappy fast fashion thing that you should definitely not buy because it falls apart, or what is a vintage sample, which is a one of a kind piece that you can find for an excellent deal at a place like Sarojini Market. So I love Sarojini for that.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a huge part of New Delhi's cultural identity as well. There are people who appreciate it because of the variety, and then there are people who make fun of it because a lot of people go hunting for this like cheap knockoffs of highly fashionable stuff or designer labels, and they are able to score something. So it's yeah, it's a fascinating place in that regard.
Actually, some of the things aren't even they're not even knockoffs. Like when I was in Delhi a year after I'd stopped working at Ralph Lauren and I had shifted to Delhi, I saw a shirt that I know I had worked on that style. I'd written a tech pack for it. The label was ripped out, but it was there. It was a
Wow.
sample that I guess the factory had kept and sold off to Sarojini, and so you could find some real stuff there. You just have to like look. The trick is look on the inside of the garment and make sure the finishing is nice and clean, and that's how you know it's a good piece.
Hmm. I know my sister will be taking up on that advice and go hunting in Sarojini Market. So yeah, that's great. Now, of course, we you alluded a little bit about fast fashion, and from my friends in fashion, I know that fast fashion is bad for the environment, but because it's cheap and they are able to come up with designs quicker, like Zara is one example, in my opinion, that is like has made this fast fashion a thing. And people in India, of course, like rather than holding on to a certain piece of clothing for 4 years, they now the mentality has shifted to the point where they feel like, okay, if I could have four different shopping seasons in a year where I have like different clothes for different times of the year, and I can use it couple of years or a year and then get something else, might as well go for that, right? Because it feels new and different, it gives you that high every few months. So how do fashion designers then tackle the idea of sustainability, given that the process of making fabric is like 80% is like just oil based, like a lot of oil is consumed in that process,
Mm.
which hurts the environment. So how do entrepreneurs or fashion designers who are sustainably conscious can make that a mainstream idea again?
Well, I guess it depends what kind of what your end product is, and if you want to keep it super affordable. Is that's been a huge challenge for us? Is that I want to make things that people can afford, but at the same time, part of sustainable fashion is ethics and paying the people who are sewing the appropriate wage so that they can have a good life. So new fashion, creating designer fashion can never be super cheap. For somebody who does not have the budget for that, which a lot of people out there, especially now, I would say thrifting, finding thrift pieces at Sarojini is actually even not a bad idea. But there's a lot of people in India and here in US doing Instagram accounts where they're going to thrift shops, they're selling secondhand stuff for like 10, $20. It's a great deal, and anything secondhand is going to be a great sustainable choice because it already exists. But as for somebody in the fashion industry who wants to be a sustainable fashion entrepreneur, um, yeah, I guess it's about what you want your price point to be. Because working with new fabrics, working with organic fabrics and natural dyes, the price point is just high. We are working on a collection of some rain-fed cotton from India with natural dyes. I think we're going to work with someone in South India, which I'm really excited about, and that's going to be a little pricey, but we're going to do our best, and I think it's going to be worth it. And otherwise, working with recycled textiles is a great route to go if you want to try and control costs. Like, we make a lot of things with recycled saris, and the cost of that is not too high. So we're able to have a reasonable cost to our customers. And there's a lot of different ways you can work with recycled fabrics. If you're in the West, you can go into Goodwill and buy every pair of black jeans that they have. Then you've got a bunch of black denim. Just cut it up and use it. You know. And in India, it's a little more difficult to find these things. We don't really have thrift shops like that as such. I'm sure you know what I mean. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's ways to find it. Yeah, I mean, I could probably go on and on about this topic, but yeah, I think that's one way to do it is to repurpose materials.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a great point because now, I mean, if you look at my wardrobe, I typically do like a lot of shopping during the festive season, which is typically Diwali and end of the year or early January, and I tend to like just stick to my clothes until like 4 or 5 years, to the point where either I don't fit into them anymore, or like I just naturally outgrow them, and then either I donate it or like go to Goodwill, because right now I'm based in New York, so I can do that. But yeah, in India, the only option would be to like either give it to your mate, or like her husband or her kids can wear it if they want it in the first place,
Yeah,
or you just like dump it, like so whenever you're putting away other stuff, you just throw it away. uh so yeah, it's a lot more challenging to do that in India, and I wish there were more initiatives where people could simply donate, or like have a Goodwill kind of a place where they could just go and share their clothing. But yeah, it's difficult. So, and it's great that all the tips that you shared, I'm sure, makes a lot of difference environmentally and economically. So yeah, I just hope that it goes on to become more sustainable as the industry evolves. So that's great. So now, fashion design as a career, what would be your advice be to people who are aspiring to become fashion designers and then also fashion entrepreneurs?
Hmm. Well, I guess it depends what they want to do. If they want to start their own brand, and this is something that I'm still even struggling with. But be very clear about what you want to make and what statement you want to make. Like, I would definitely recommend everybody do a lot of self introspection, meditation, journaling. Really get yourself clear on what you want to say to the world through your work, so that you can have that impact that you desire to have with what you want to say. And you don't need a fancy fashion school degree. You don't need to work at the topmost place. Like, I think as long as you are feeling passionate and you're doing the work and you put yourself out there, that's actually one big thing is don't hide it away because you're afraid it's not perfect. Whatever work you want to express or things you want to say, just put them out there. You will find the right people, but you can only do that if you get out there and share your message.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's very well said. And i I've done that in my media career, so as to say, because I used to study economics and finance. I come from banking, and my undergrad was in business. So I come from that, like analytical bent of mind. So for me, of course, when I was looking to have a career in media, a lot of things I had to do on my own. So figuring out what film to make, how to edit, how to bring things on camera, and it was a lot more challenging than I initially thought it to be. But as you said, I just put myself out there and like shared my creativity with the world. It didn't resonate immediately, but it did happen eventually. So yeah, I think that's great advice. And as long as people are expressing themselves, I feel then their work, be it in fashion or whatever other industry, will speak for itself. So I think, yeah, that's a great
Yeah.
advice.
You'll attract the right crowd. As long as you're just putting something out there, the right thing will come back for sure.
Right, yeah. So now, of course, New York is the home of the legendary New York Fashion Week, and of course, I'm sure Delhi and Mumbai has its own set of great fashion shows as well. Now in these fashion shows you see a lot of radical design, like there is some like huge feather on somebody's hat, or like a gown that just doesn't end, or some crazy combination of color and material that you would feel like nobody's going to wear this in their daily routine, unless of course you're Lady Gaga or Ranveer Singh. That's a different story. But like the rest of the humanity is not going to wear like some crazy feather thing or like the endless gown. So what's the journey of like a piece like that, which is very clearly not meant for like the daily routine, but then eventually it does make it to mainstream fashion in some form? Like, what's the journey like? What happens after the show is done and that dress is put away?
Well, that dress itself probably would go out to, like, I guess if we're talking about high end design, like something like Gucci or what have you, Louis Vuitton, that might make an art piece like that. So that piece would probably go on to be used for people like Lady Gaga on stage or something like that. They Vogue would take it for photo shoots and give it back. I'm not sure that a piece like that ever goes into anyone's wardrobe for regular wear. Maybe some eccentric New York socialite. But let's say that this piece is used over and over again, this large feather hat or whatnot. You might see smaller designers or smaller brands referencing that, like putting a feather on something, a smaller feather, a more wearable feather, and doing a nod to that piece, but not making that exact piece. And yeah, I guess taking the essence of it, but making it wearable is something that happens a lot. You'll see these crazy things on the runway, and they'll get filtered down to something that people could wear to work over the course of 1 or 2 seasons.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I first sort of had this question when I saw this, duotone, like like dual tone shirts, like designer shirts from men that has like two color thing going on, and I just felt like, how did this come to be? And then when I looked at some of the, like, did some research online, I found that a lot of them were first part of European fashion shows, and then a lot of, like, mass manufacturers saw that opportunity to combine colors in single fabric, and that's how it came to be. So yeah, I think that's great. And there are so many crazy socialites in New York City that I do see that big feather popping up from time to time. So it's that. Right. Okay. Now, were you, given that you have seen the world of fashion in New York as well as in India, were you ever surprised to discover any similarities between Western design and South Asian designs?
Yes. So when it comes to, I see Western and Eastern fashion are kind of like learning from each other all of the time. Of course, in from what I've seen, I'm still learning about like the high fashion scene in India. It's a lot of embroidery. They use like the more embroidery and the heavier the thing, the more high fashion it seems to be considered. Of course, again, this is my uneducated assumption based on what I've seen. But yeah, and then in US you have more like different cuts and colors and that sort of thing. And then in India you have a lot of embroidery. But I'm sure that there's more similarities that over time I will come to learn about. I'm still opening my mind and just seeing what I can see.
That's great. Right. So that brings us to our last question. Are there What are the exciting projects that you're currently working on, and what can the viewers expect from you going ahead?
So right now we just finished a collection of recycled sari kaftans. I'm wearing one of them. We use the border around the edge and the palu at the end, and they're meant to be somewhat seasonless in that they have a waist tie. You can tie them on when it gets a little cold. You can kind of leave it open with your bathing suit. Sometimes I wear it over sweaters and jeans in the winter to kind of break up the dark colors with the bright color. So that's what we have for summer right now, and I'm really excited about that. And we have just started being stocked at the Canvas in Williamsburg, in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm really excited. We're going to be visiting there next week to see how the clothes look in the boutique, which is great. We are starting to work with an e-commerce platform in New Jersey, which I will talk about on Instagram eventually. They're social impact driven uh, collaborative. They are South Asian founders, and they're interested in working with brands that do upliftment work over in South Asia, and so we will be stocking with them. And then in the fall, right now I'm designing a full collection of a few different looks to really express who Swiatlo is as a brand and what we have to say creatively with a variety of like I said, rain-fed cotton, natural dyes, that sort of thing. So that's what we are looking forward to share for the future.
That's great. I'm so excited that you're making these great strides and taking your fashion all over the world. And I'm personally excited to see the designs go out in the world and inspire people. Who knows? Maybe Anshia and Shriyatlo has a collaboration down the line at some stage.
I would love
But
that.
yeah, that's something that we can discuss. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think your journey is quite inspirational, and a lot of people will be excited to look up fashion based on your experience and your designs. So it's great that you shared all of this, and yeah, it was great fun having you on the show.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to speak with you.